Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ulan Gaming, and I'm here with another tier list. This time for light range cavalry. Let's get into this once again. Just as a precursor, Aussie Drongo made some tier lists for all of the units a while back, but the lists are now outdated after several balance updates, plus four new civilizations that have come out since then. So I have taken it under myself to update and complete these tier lists. And what makes me qualified for this is because I have closely looked at every single unit's stats in the game, in close work with the Age of Empires 3 companion app, which I also have update videos for on the channel that I am helping to produce alongside Hell Punch. And most of the work that I have put into that app involves recording all of unit stats, multipliers, and civilization accessibility and such into Excel sheets. So that is where we're at, and without any further ado, let's get started. We will start with the S-Class Dragoons. First and foremost, the best Dragoon in the game. Where are you? Here you are. The Reuter. I don't think anybody could ever dispute that the Reuter is like the best Dragoon in the game. They have their Royal Guard upgrade, they have the Cavalry combat card, they are one population, they are cheap as all hell, they pack really tightly, and they're just overall fantastic units. There's just no disputing it. Our next S-Class Dragoon is going to be the Eagle Runner. Like I said before in all of my other lists, a lot of this list will look very similar to Aussie Drago's, just because a lot of what he said back then still rings true for today. This is more so about any changes, differing opinions that an alternate point of view might have access to, as well as accounting for the new units. Which we will all hit last. So the Eagle Runner Knight is the Aztec Dragoon equivalent, and they are absolute monsters. They're a little slow to build up. You don't have great shipments. You don't have them in too high a quantity when it comes to shipments. I think they have a 6 Eagle Runner Knight shipment. But they are incredibly upgradable. They get a total of plus 30% in stats in the third age, basically a guard upgrade. As well as a card that boosts their range up to 16. And what makes these guys really special is they are a one-pop unit, just like the Dragoon, but they are they have the same DPS as a normal two-pop Dragoon, and they have more HP than the Reuter, despite being one pop and having the same damage output as... even more damage output, I think, than a normal 2-pop Dragoon. They do 30 base damage at 3 speed, which it's actually 15 at 1.5, but, you know. But these units are absolute monsters. They have 30% range resistance as well, which is among the highest for Dragoon classes. Dragoons generally have pretty low resistance. And these guys are just absolute monsters in general. Across the board. They got high HP for one population. They have absurd damage for their class, and they can. You get to a point where you get enough of them, they will just eat everything alive. Skirmishers, musketeers, everything. And that's pretty much it with the Eagle Runner. Let's see here. Our next S-Class will be the Lakota Bow Rider. So the Lakota Bow Rider, I keep accidentally going all the way to the top when I do that. The Lakota Bow Rider is a Dragoon available in the second age with very high HP and very high damage, and unlike every other unit listed here, the Bow Rider does not have a negative multiplier against villagers, and they also get the speed boost from the Explorers, so you can make these Bow Riders, and they will just go around and destroy all the villagers on the map, because unless you're playing United States or France, your villagers have melee resistance, so that makes these Bow Riders better at raiding than Axe Riders, really. These bow riders can be absolutely nuts. They have cavalry combat cards in the second age. They're fantastic units, and I don't think anybody would ever dispute that they belong in S tier. Now we've hit the top of the list. Let's talk about the barrel bottom of the list. First up is the Black Rider. This is specifically the Swedish Black Rider, not any Black Rider shipments that are available to like Germany or anything like that, but specifically Swedish, because the Black Rider serves as Sweden's Dragoon type unit because they don't have one otherwise. Aussie Drongo put this in D as well, and it still continues to be in D, except even more so now. It might be lower in D. And that is just because Sweden's got nerfed since he made that list. Their coin gather rate has lowered. And as such, it just makes it very difficult, even more so than before, to mass Black Riders if you need them. And they also have melee resistance as well instead of range resistance, which does not help that much either, as most of the damage you're going to be taking in any given game will probably be ranged. So that is where the Black Rider lies. Our other D tier is going to be the Keshik from China. The Keshik is just, once again, as with all China units, they're tied to banner armies, which suck, because banner armies, you have to get them with another unit. I think one of the only ones that you would ever want to get Keshiks with is, like, they get Keshik Pike, which isn't great, because it's double anti-cav, which I suppose is okay if you really need some anti-cav. It's nice to have a full anti-cav option. But Keshiks would be better if you could just make just the Keshiks, but Keshiks are extremely squishy. They have very low damage, and on top of that, they don't even have a multiplier against artillery, which is something that pretty much every other Dragoon present here does in fact have. So that makes the Keshik just really an all-around bad anti-cavalry unit. China's best anti-cavalry unit is Dragoons from the Russian consulate, which is really funny because Russians don't have Dragoons. They have cavalry archers, which I suppose we'll talk about next. The Russian and Ottoman cavalry archers. These units have high DPS, but they are stand and fire. You can't hit and run with them very well. Because they only have high DPS when they're firing, and they also have it would be when they're standing still and firing, and they also have less movement than all of the other Dragoons, which is a rather important feature as your Dragoons need to be able to chase down cavalry. So just because of those reasons, I'm going to sit the Bow Riders in C tier. I think Aussie ended up putting them in B tier, but I can't see it personally. I really can't. So next we'll talk about the Bolus Warrior. Now previously the Bolus Warrior was in D tier for the Inca, but Inca have gotten the Bolus Warrior got a buff recently, and they're actually about to get a nerf according to the February pup notes, because they got so strong. So it used to be D tier because of their firing animation, where it's just like the It's just like the British longbow, where they have to go through the whole wind-up animation before they throw their bolus, but it's even worse because they have 3 attack speed. So not only do you have to hit and run, but then you have to wait for the whole damn animation, for the whole damn 3 seconds before you fire again. So if you hit and run with these guys, you're firing like once every 4 seconds. It's really terrible. But they got an improvement to their fire rates that they threw at the beginning of the animation instead. And just because of that, it made the Bolus Warrior incredibly strong. They have multipliers against cavalry. They have splash damage. They snare from range. The only thing they don't have going for them is a negative multiplier against infantry that is getting increased. So they're going to be doing even less damage to infantry after this next buff. But, I mean, really, they just pair so well with the Haraka, which is an S-class unit, that I'm going to go ahead and put Bolus Warriors with the February pup notes in mind in B tier. Just because they also do have the slowest movement of any unit here. Any unit present here, I'm pretty sure. So now let's talk about the War Wagon. War Wagon is the German unit. They're supposed to be Dragoons that are 3 population. and have high damage and range, but their damage and range just isn't high enough to warrant the extra 3 population and slow movement they have. So they kind of just sit at the top of B here. They're serviceable, don't get me wrong, but once again, they have the Black Rider problem of being of having melee resistance instead of ranged, but they don't suffer from the Black Rider problem of costing way too much coin for the Civ to handle, because Germany has a pretty strong eco with the settler wagons and early game cards, so it is pretty not unreasonable to train war wagons. They definitely also have better shipments, considering the only way you get Black Riders as a shipment is by spending coin. So I do definitely think that the War Wagon is far, far better than the Black Rider. Specifically the Sweden trainable Black Rider. I do think a Black Rider shipment is much better than a War Wagon shipment if you're talking about like Germany and stuff. But War Wagons will sit here at the B tier. And now we'll talk about... Let's talk about the India units, the Zambarok and the Howdah. Zambaroks are extremely fast units. They have they have an insane speed. They also are available from the Second Age, making India one of the only civs with a really solid Age 2 Skirm Goon combo. They do pretty decent damage. They have the same problem that Sours do, which is just that they're really fucking squishy. Just super, super squishy. And I personally have never had too much success when using them when playing India, but I do understand that they're pretty decent. I'm going to place them just for the fact alone that they are available in the Second Age and very fast in A tier. I'll probably end up placing them at the bottom of A tier though, just because they don't have access to too many upgrades, and they do kind of fall off later in the game pretty hard. I just realized that we have another cavalry archer here. That's not supposed to be here. Oops. And then we'll finish off with the Howdah. So the Howdah is... I heard the Howdah described as what the War Wagon wants to be, and that's extremely true. It's a high population costing Dragoon with lots of range and a very high attack, but unlike the War Wagon, it has enough extra range and attack to back it up. I mean, you can one-shot an Ulan with like 2 of these things. They are absolutely nuts in the damage department, and the fact that they have extra range means you can even like the fact that you can have extra range means they can even fight like against musketeers and hit and run them and kill them in a couple hits too, just because they have like 78 base attack. It is absolutely nuts, and like all of the elephants that India has, they're very upgradable. They have a 20% combat card, a reduction to cost and train time, and a reduction to population cost. So I definitely think the Howdah is an underused India unit that... I do think it's worse than the Zambarak, only in the way that they are expensive, and the Zambarak is available in the Second Age, whereas the Howdah is locked until 3rd. But I do think it should sit in A tier in its rightful place, right next to the Zambarak. I do think that overall India has extremely good anti-cavalry Dragoon type units to pick from. So next we'll talk about the Musket Rider. The Musket Rider is the Haudenosaunee Dragoon type unit. They are cheap but coin heavy, and like all Haudenosaunee units, they are extremely tanky in combination with the cavalry combat card they have, as well as the Explorer's HP aura. And but the fact that they are a little coin costing heavy, I'm just gonna put them... I don't know too much about them. I don't think I've seen too many Haudenosaunee players use them, so I'm just going to default to Aussie Drongo's choice to put them in B tier and say, yeah, that's probably fair. So sorry if you wanted an in-depth analysis on them. Now let's talk about the Yabasume. Now the Yabasume is it's the cavalry archer but Japanese, and the Yabasume is just like all of Japan's units, ridiculously upgradable to a point of serious question in terms of why they are that upgradable. Just like with all of Japan's units, they can get like almost 30% attack and 10% HP in auras around the map from various things, and they can just be DPS monsters. But like the cavalry archers, they start out pretty weak, and you definitely need to take your time to upgrade them. They're more of a late game unit and specifically meant to counter artillery more than cavalry. So for that, they do take a long time to build up. So I will put them probably at the bottom of B tier. I think that's an okay spot for them. Next is the Rifle Rider. The Rifle Rider is the Lakota unit. It has a 3 times multiplier against cavalry, a 6 times multiplier against artillery, and a 3 times multiplier against heavy cavalry. But it has both the light and heavy cavalry tags, which basically means that this thing hard counters artillery, musketeers, and hand cavalry, and is super hard countered by skirmishers and everything else on this list. And for that, they're very niche in that they can completely destroy one specific army comp. Like, for example, British's musketeer rocket. They can like solo an entire army comps of like Musk Cannon, but they lose really, really hard to a Skirm Goon. But because they can solo an entire unit comp by themselves, I will put them probably above the Howdah. The Lakota also has a card that transforms all of their axe riders into rifle riders in the Third Age, which can be a really good switcheroo when somebody knows you're making lots of axe riders, so they make lots of musketeers, and then boom, you have the counter, just like that. And there is something definitely to be said for that. And now we get into the various Dragoons. We'll start with Brits. Brits in Portugal have the best Dragoons available to them. We'll put them probably at the top of A tier, I think is a pretty fair space for these. They have lots of combat cards available to them, as well as extra range cards, which aren't quite as important as in 1v1 as they are for team games. But I still do think they are very viable options. And yeah, they're just overall very strong Dragoons with lots of upgrade potential. If a Brit player wants to make goons, go right ahead. If a Portugal player wants to make Dragoons, by all means. In fact, I think I might actually place the Portugal Dragoon higher just because they also have the Royal Guard upgrade for the extra 10%. The German and Spain Dragoons are also very good, just because they are Dragoons. I do think they do notably have worse upgrades, however. Well, not worse upgrades, they just have less upgrades available to them than Portugal and Great Britain have. Lastly, it's time for the New Civilizations Dragoons, starting with the Carbine Cavalry. The Carbine Cavalry is at the bottom of C tier. So Carbine Cavalry have a faster rate of fire than the other Dragoons, but they fire in 2 separate shots, meaning they go pop, pop, and then they load. And they don't have 1.5, they have 2.2 for their ranged attack speed, which makes them very difficult to kite with, because because they have half the attack of a Dragoon, just like a cavalry archer, but whereas a cavalry archer theoretically could hit and run and fire once every 5 seconds, 1.5 seconds, the Carbine Cavalry, if he hits and run, he has to hit and run once every 2.2 seconds. And it just makes them very low in the damage department unless they are standing and firing, just like the cavalry archer, but notably worse than the cavalry archer because their hit and run is even worse. just because it's slower. They do have a 25% attack plus 10% range resist upgrade, which gives them a total of 20% range resist, but it is not high enough to bring them up any higher than C tier, just because nobody uses that card, because the Carbine Cavalry still suck. If US play, and that is a big problem USA has in terms of unit composition, is they just have really low, really bad anti-cavalry in general across the board. If you're a US player and you want good massable anti-cav, you want to use the USA Dragoon, available through the Arman's Legion, which makes them trainable at forts. Now you'll notice that I didn't put the Ulan or the Magyar Hussar in the heavy cavalry tier list, and on one hand, it's because I forgot. And on the other hand, I forgot because nobody uses them, because Georgia, the fact that the Georgia Hussar cards exists kind of makes the normal USA Hussar outclass the other two, the Ulans and the Magyar Hussar, and there's just never any reason to send those. But there is a reason to send the Goons, so I am putting them here. USA gets access to a 9 Goon shipment and the ability to train them at forts. Which is your best bet for massing anti-cav if you need it. I actually have a USA build order that is based around getting 2 forts and the 9 Ulan card in, and the 9 Dragoon card in, and starting to produce Dragoons within like 10 minutes or something like within like 8 minutes or something like that. And it's definitely a really cool build order, but it is true that this does make the USA Dragoons have a very high upfront cost, because you either need 1 shipment and 500 food, 1,000 wood, and 600 coin, so that you can ship the shipment and build a fort, or you need 2 shipments, 500 food, and 500 coins, so you can send the shipment. One for the Dragoons and one for the fort, which does make them a very high costing unit in terms of actually making. They get the extra 10% from coming from the Legion, but they don't have. But USA doesn't have any other combat cards that can affect the Dragoons. Not even the Florida one. The Florida one only affects hand cavalry. So I will say that this does make the USA Dragoon easily the worst of the Dragoons. I'll put it probably right here. I do like it just because even though the shipment is expensive, you get 9 of them, and that's really powerful. And they also shadow tech, so that can help make up for the resource cost right there as well. In fact, I think I might actually bump them above the Bolus Warrior. No, the Bolus Warrior is pretty good. I think that's a pretty fair spot right there. As for the Mexico Dragoon, Mexico actually has the Dragoon available to them just on their own, and they also have a card that boosts them in damage as well as enables them to be trained in the second age. And unlike the USA one, it's free, which basically just makes them already way better than the USA Dragoons. You don't see a lot of Mexico players use it very often, just because their cavalry is kind of, them as anti-cavalry is kind of outclassed by the Soldado, which we will talk about in the heavy infantry tier list when we get to it. Should be up next, I think. So we will put the Mexico Dragoon right here. It's better than the USA Dragoon at the very least, but it's still not one of the civilization's primary assets that you really ever see people going with. So that is where that will stay. And lastly is the Javelin Rider, available to Ethiopia and Hausa. I am clumping them together. The Javelin Rider is like the Reuter, but very tanky. And they also have a 1.5 rate of fire. Javelin Riders are very, very good. Just all around. They have combat cards for both civs, and they definitely deserve a place high up on the tier list. Probably top of A, maybe bottom of S. I'm not entirely sure. I haven't played against too many Hausa and Ethiopia players, so I'm not exactly the expert, but I do know that the Javelin Rider is very, very strong. I know they were S at some point, but I also know they got nerfed, and I don't know how big of a nerf that was. So for now, this is where they will stay. If you have any thoughts regarding any of these placements, please let me know. Specifically in relation to the Javelin Rider, I'm very curious to hear people's stances on the Javelin Rider. So thank you very much for coming, and I hope you come again for the next tier list. Thank you, and goodbye.